Tours of Aldridge Kitchen Gardener. Today is a beautiful day. It's the 20th of May, so we're in the middle of May, and I'm going to be planting out my French beans. So I've got two different varieties, which I've got my climbing beans to go up my frame, and I've also got my dwarf bush type. Now I do find that the dwarf bush type are actually a huge amount more productive than your climbing ones, but just because it's going to look pretty having a climbing bean up a frame, and then the rest of this is going to be bush beans, so I'm going to crack on with that job right now. These are my sweet peas that I sowed at the end of last year and planted them out the very end of March, and as you can see they've gone absolutely rampant, and I've already had a huge amount of pickings out of them. I use these for cut flowers, so as soon as they start to flower, every 2 to 3 days I cut all the flowers off of your sweet peas. But if you are growing sweet peas at home and you want them to look absolutely beautiful in your back garden, that is absolutely fine. Just remember, you have to continuously deadhead them, so as soon as they finish flowering, make sure you go through the whole lot and take out all of those old flowering stems, because as soon as they set seed, the plant actually stops flowering. So to prolong your flowering for the longest amount that you can throughout the growing season, make sure you deadhead or cut the flowers fresh, put them in a beautiful bouquet, and the smell of the varieties that I've got is absolutely beautiful. Here I've got my broad beans, and I'm really pleased. They're a really nice healthy plant, but I have noticed we're starting to get an awful lot of black fly. Now if you're an organic gardener, there's not a huge amount that you can do with that. You can pinch the tops out, but we normally do that in June time. So the only other thing that I could recommend is you either squish them and try and keep on top of them that way, or you can purchase SB Plant Invigorator, which is like a fancy fairy liquid, or alternatively you can use fairy liquid and just lightly spray onto your plants, but try not to do it in direct sunlight, to do it on a shady day and at the beginning of the day, just so it doesn't burn or scorch your plants. So here I've got a huge amount of garlic. It's absolutely beautiful. It is suffering very, very badly with rust, but you know what, I've come to the conclusion I don't actually do anything, and there's not anything that you can actually do about rust apart from cut off the leaves. But I sometimes find also, if you do cut off the leaves, you're more likely to reduce its chances of photosynthesizing and producing a really good bulb under the ground. So I now just leave it, and obviously as soon as I've dried the plants or remove any of the leaves, I make sure that I burn them so those spores don't, you know, they aren't put in the compost and then they're not transferred for next year. Also as well, if you have grown any early varieties, so I've got extra early white, you can start digging them up and using them now, and it's called a green garlic, purely because it's not dry, it's beautiful and fresh, and that garlic is really, really punchy as well. With your hardneck varieties, you will start to notice they're actually sending out their flowering stem, which is here, and these, if you break them off, which you need to do anyway, that then concentrates putting the energy back into the bulb instead of producing the flower, so you don't want to be producing this flower. But also as well, when you cut these, you can stir fry them, boil them, and they're absolutely beautiful, so you're getting maximum amount of use out of your plant. So if you collect a few of these up and bung them in a stir fry, they're an absolute delight, and you're utilising the whole of the plant. As we all know, there are two different types of garlic bulbs that you can buy. You can buy hardneck and you can buy softneck. The two differences between them is hardneck, obviously because it creates this flowering stem, creates a hard neck in the centre of your garlic. So when you buy dried garlic from the supermarkets, some of them have that hard neck and some don't actually have any hard neck at all, which is why it's called a soft neck. So the hard neck is ultimately the flowering stem, which is what you get your scaps from, which is what your flowering bud is called, and that also is edible. And that is basically the difference between the two. The soft neck doesn't produce any flowers, the hard necks do. So if you do want to grow scaps for next year, make sure you get your hard neck varieties. and that will produce your flowering stem. I grow a vast amount of brassicas, and the EnviroMesh doesn't always look too great. I try and create really nice tunnels and keep the EnviroMesh nice and tight and really neat, so it's not messy looking in the garden. But also it's really important to have your EnviroMesh, especially this time of the year. As you'll most probably notice, you'll see a lot of the cabbage white butterflies, which are your white with little black tips to them, and that is your cabbage white. And you've got to be really careful, because as soon as they start laying eggs on your brassicas, soon enough we'll start having caterpillars, and the whole of your brassica crops can be decimated within a matter of weeks. So if you have fleece or EnviroMesh, whack that over the top of them and just protect your plants so you can eat it and not the bugs. This is my celeriac and celery bed. I've only managed to plant out the celeriac at the moment, but if you are growing celery or celeriac, make sure these plants are irrigated or watered continuously, especially as we're hitting a lot of dry periods at the moment. Make sure they're watered as much as possible, because unfortunately if they're not watered they will bolt, and we don't want bolting. We want nice, beautiful, lovely, fresh vegetables. When it comes to your onions, there really is no easy way of weeding around these guys. You can hoe down the centres just to give yourself a bit of a chance, but unfortunately around the bulbs you're going to have to weed by hand. It is quite painstaking, but it looks absolutely wonderful once you've completed that job. And make sure that the weeds around your onions are kept down as much as possible, because they really don't like any kind of competition. Potatoes are a fantastically easy crop compared to some crops to look after. The only problem they do have is obviously blight. Now blight isn't so much of a problem now, but if you are growing your main crops, they are definitely one to look out for. And you just want to keep an eye out on the leaves and make sure they've got no sort of, almost like a leaf scorch effect, where they're shriveled round the edges, brown and yellow. Make sure you keep an eye out for that. The way that you can tell if blight is going to be present in your local area is when night temperatures are below 10 degrees and the humidity is over 90. So you can go through the Blight Association, put in your postcode, and they can ping you when blight is in your area. And even though there's not anything that you can do about blight per se, it is just good to be vigilant, so you can obviously save your crops. So whether that means that you've got to harvest it a little bit earlier, or if you have blight, you know, then you're not putting it onto your compost, and you can make sure you burn any foliage or affected plants. Now we've got into these hot, dry periods of beautiful British weather. Unfortunately, this is where spinach really starts to suffer, and I always find that you can sow it. You might be able to get one pick, but as soon as you've done that, it generally bolts on you, which is exactly what this is doing. It's just creating a flowering stem. You can still use the foliage, so what you'll have to do is just obviously dig it up to save it from going to seed, and just use whatever leaves you can. But this is where the New Zealand spinach really comes into its own. So you still get those beautiful spinach leaves without the stress of it bolting. So the glass house over the next up and coming 2 weeks is really going to empty out. So I've got celery, sweet corn, I've got courgettes, pumpkins and goods, and like I said, over the next 2 weeks they're all going to be out in the ground, because we've now got to that point where frost isn't so much of a problem. We're still in that period where we could get a snap of frost, but hopefully it won't be too cold that your plants will suffer too much. But if you are in a frosty area or exposed to really high winds, try and hold off with your planting. You know, harden your plants off properly, especially things like your beans and your sweet corn, because unfortunately if they get hit with really hard wind or a little bit of cold, that will knock them back, and then that means that they won't produce as quick, and the plant can just take a little bit longer to really get going. So it's always worth spending just that little bit of time hardening your plants off, getting them used to the outside weather or whatever conditions that you live in around the country before they go into their final position. And this glass house, once a lot of these crops have gone, is then going to turn into the melon house, and I can't wait to show you when I start producing the melons. your blueberry bushes should be in full swing. They should either be dripping with bell-shaped flowers or have slight fruit development on them. Now, blueberry bushes are an acidic loving plant, so you're going to need to make sure that you're either on an acidic soil or alternatively use ericaceous compost. Ideally, if you are on a limey soil, you're going to need to put them in a pot. So you can either have the pot above ground, or you can do what I've done, where I've actually dug out holes and sunk the pots into the ground. And for me, it gives it more of a naturalistic look. Also with that, I normally feed mine with every 2 weeks with liquid seaweed feed, which is slightly on the acidic side, and the bush will actually absolutely love that. Along with that, try not to water with mains water because it's slightly limey and it's got a lot of chlorine in it. So if you can, try and use rainwater. When it comes to your gooseberry bushes, keep a really keen eye on them. We're now into the month where sawfly can attack, and that will then turn into caterpillars which will absolutely decimate your plants. These got hit last year with sawfly, which is why they're looking pretty ropey. They should be a lot bigger and a lot more of a healthier bush. So this year I'm just going to keep a real vigilant eye out for any pest and disease and try and deal with it as quickly and efficiently as I possibly can. So here we have peach leaf curl. So this can affect quite a lot of plants. This is on one of my current bushes. Unfortunately, there's not a huge amount you can do with it apart from actually picking it off and then disposing of it by burning it. Don't ever put it onto your compost heap. Rhubarb harvesting season is well underway, and they're an absolutely beautiful crop to have anywhere in your back garden or down your allotment plot. They are very, very thirsty plants. There's an old saying, even when it's raining, water your rhubarb. Thanks guys for watching, and I hope you managed to pick up a few tips and tricks along the way with this video, and just enjoy this season. We're really, soon at the end of May. A lot of us will have most of our produce out, so it will just be a case of maintenance and keeping everything going, harvesting, and I cannot wait until we get really into that point where we're harvesting like crazy. We're just on that cusp at the moment where we're taking a few little bits, but we're not really in the midst of it just yet. And just enjoy this time and make sure that you at some point sit down with a cup of tea and just take it in. It's a very, very busy time of the year. I've been absolutely flat out, which is why unfortunately I haven't been able to do as many videos as I'd like. But it's just really important to just sit down, take in all your hard work, because it is blinking hard work, and just enjoy this time of the year, because by the time we know it, we'll be back in winter and it'll be blinking freezing and we won't be outside, or we will be outside but we'll be miserable. So just enjoy, and I will catch you on the next video.